Well, hello and welcome. Today we find ourselves in St. Maarten. You can see that is the famous Maho Beach, where people go to drink and go to the beach and stand behind that fence watching the airplanes land and take off. And today we're going to be doing a short flight over to St. Barth's, which is famous worldwide for its extreme airport. Whenever I think of St. Barth's, I always think of a fella called Remy de Haenen. Remy de Haenen was a Dutch-French adventurer and aviation pioneer of sorts. He was the first person in the late 40s to actually land an airplane on the island of St. Barth. And he didn't do it just as some crazy stunt. He did it out of a conviction that the way to accelerate the economic development of a lot of these islands was to make them accessible to air travel. And so that's what he did. Eventually he went out and did the first landing at Saba as well. And we will be going to Saba in a future trip. In any event, he went on to become the mayor of St. Barth. And in the mid-60s, he bought a Cessna 310 from my uncle. My uncle was a distributor for Cessnas in the Caribbean at that time. And from time to time, Remy de Haenen would come in his blue 310 to San Juan for maintenance. And so we became a little bit aware of what he was trying to do, and he would always ask us to stop by if wherever we were in the area to go out and have lunch or something. And that's what we did on this particular day. We had flown over to St. Maarten to bring some people on a charter on a Skymaster. And after we landed and left our passengers off, the fellow who was the chief pilot of our charter operation and knew Remy de Haenen fairly well, got on the left seat. He was a wonderful man. He was an ex-colonel from the Air Force, a tremendous pilot, and helped me a lot with my own flying. And he said, I'm going to give you a treat today. He got on the left seat, and he did the trip over to St. Barth's. He landed in St. Barth's, and then I had a chance to do the takeoff coming out of St. Barth's. And so that's what we're going to do today. I'll tell you something more about it as we go along, but let's go ahead and configure the airplane and get ready for takeoff. Excuse me. If you see some of those lists of extreme airports that you see sometimes published in YouTube and other places, they will include not just St. Barth's and Saba, but they will include St. Maarten as well. And I guess it can be fairly extreme if you are coming in a 747 or something, but certainly in a small airplane like this, we're back in the Duke. It is not very extreme at all. It's about 7,500 feet, even though it has a little hill at the end. And so here we go. We're going to get started. We've got some flaps. We got booster pumps. Everything on the green, and here we go. Knots, 95, rotate, and here we go. Gears coming up. Build up to speed, flaps up. Trip is only about 15 or 16 miles from St. Maarten. If you go to YouTube, there are several very good tutorials on how to fly the new procedures that are in place for St. Barth's. My intent here is not to do a tutorial of sorts, but because I have not gone there. I only went there that one time 50 years ago, 49 years ago, or wherever it was. But my intent is to tell you something about our experience on that particular day. For starters, the runway, I guess now is about 2,100 feet. And the runway as we see it today was not paved back then. We only had about 600 feet of pavement of cement that was laid down at the beginning of the runway, and then the cement would run out and you would run into a dirt strip that would eventually go down to the beach and into the sand. So it was, you wanted to touch down in that concrete portion to make sure that you had enough space to stop before the end of the runway. You get down to 1,500 feet. From what I understand now, there are 3 reporting points that there's no control tower, but there is a Unicom out there, and there's also a requirement that anybody landing in St. Barth have a special endorsement to do so. You need special instruction and all the rest of it. And apparently the first reporting point is this little island that is in front of us that is called Horseshoe. And by the time you get to Horseshoe, you're supposed to have your gear down and be flying at 1,500 feet. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're at 1,500 feet. As soon as we get closer, we're going to slow it down a little bit and put the gear down. Go ahead and clean it up. We're in good shape. Of course, there was no commercial service that I can remember into St. Bart's back then. Mostly private airplanes coming in. Remy the Haenen residence, what is now the Eden Rock Hotel, used to be his residence. It was a residence slash guest house, I guess. He had some guest rooms, and he would invite some rich and famous people over, and that's gradually how the popularity of the island began to grow. On this particular day, there wasn't much happening. We just went out there. We just slowed down a little bit. We just went out there and took a car from the airport, went up to the beautiful terrace at the original residence and had lunch over there. This here is Horseshoe. I want you to be at 1,500 feet, which we are right now, and to have your gear down by the time you're here. So speed is bleeding off. There come the flaps, and here comes the gear. We would do our first reporting point here, and then we would aim to that rock over on it's going to be in front of the airplane now. Straight ahead, called Sugar Loaf, Pan de Sucre, Sugar Loaf. I guess this is essentially a left base leg for runway 10. 10 is the more famous, I guess, of the approaches. It's the one that comes over that 150-foot hill just before the runway. You can come across the other way in the little bay that there is on 28, which has its own complications because it doesn't allow for a go-around, obviously. But the more famous approach and the one that most people want to do is the one over to 10. So we're essentially, that's over on the left side there, so we're essentially on the left base here. Trying to keep our 1,500 feet. We're supposed to be at 1,500 feet, fully configured by the time we get to Sugar Loaf. Sugar Loaf would be the second reporting point, and then the third would be right at the coastline on short final. Let's go ahead and report Sugar Loaf, lower the remaining flaps, start slowing it down and configuring it for landing. Lining up with the runway. Setting up our descent angle. Here we go. The runway is coming up 12 o'clock now. we call for short final now. Trying to find between 95 and 100 knots here. Remember when we landed in Culebra that we said we wanted to bring a little faster speed than you would normally bring in another airplane, especially with a severe flare that you have to do in this approach. There's a little road. I remember the little road when we did the original landing many, many years ago. Touched down a little farther than I wanted, but just about safe enough. Certainly wouldn't be the first one to have gone into that sand, for sure. You can see up on the right-hand side there, that is what is today the Eden Rock Hotel, but that used to be Remy de Haenen's personal residence back then. And beautiful terrace overlooking the beaches on both sides and overlooking the airport. And that's where we had lunch that day. Took off in this direction and turned to the left back to St. Maarten. Again, it was all this paved runway did not exist. There was only 600 feet of pavement from the beginning of the runway, 600 feet down. That's all there was. The rest of it was just dirt at that point. And of course, they have a beautiful terminal building now and offices and all the rest of it. None of that was here when we came in 1967, 68. So there it is, fairly short flight. From St. Maarten to St. Barth as a small tribute to Remy de Haenen. Great aviator, great gentleman, adventurer, and a very, very important force in the development of St. Barth, certainly, and Saba, at least. In any event, here we are. Maybe we can go out and grab lunch at the same terrace today. I hope you enjoyed it and talk to you later. We'll see you on our next flight. Bye-bye.